So David was gracious enough at the last minute, right, Jay? So I asked him at the last minute to give a presentation on a story map or a story app, right, Esri's story app that he's creating for Pima County, one of their flagship parks, the Agua Caliente Park. And David, he'll give his own bio, but he's very talented in presenting and working with maps and symbology and communicating that information over these web applications and story maps. He's been with the county, I think it's been over a year, but I think he's come from the field of education. But I'll leave it to David to introduce himself. So David, if you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth and Jenna. It's actually only been 7 months that I've been with Pima County. It seems like a year, but I've definitely enjoyed my time here so far. I'm a GIS analyst here with Pima County ITD, and like Elizabeth said, my prior career was in youth development. I was a high school environmental science teacher here in Tucson, and later coordinated educational programming for Arizona Cooperative Extension. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about StoryMap on Agua Caliente Park here in eastern Pima County. This StoryMap is actually part of a larger collaboration between Pima County Natural Resources, Parks and Recreation and Pima County GIS to update and improve how we communicate with the public. And so in some cases, this involves refreshing some older apps to reflect more modern design standards or mobile-first development strategies. And in other cases, like with Agua Caliente, we are starting from scratch and creating new applications to connect with folks. And basically the goal of this project is to meet people where they are when it comes to finding and accessing information about county parks. Before I joined the project, Luke Henderson, who's another GIS analyst on our team, completed a couple of these story maps, one for the Sweetwater Preserve west of Tucson, and the other was for historic Canoa Ranch down near Green Valley. So we decided to use story maps as the primary medium for these web apps for a few reasons. I think that sometimes we take for granted that people interpret our maps exactly how we intend them to. And so using story maps helps us to guide the reader's interpretation. And it also is an engaging thing. It engages people's minds and curiosity. Story maps are also optimized for viewing on a variety of screen sizes. And so since most web traffic in the US comes from mobile devices, we are in redoing some of these apps, trying to put that first and considering how people are actually visiting our websites. And then the last thing is that sharing is an important aspect. We want to make it easy for people to share these story maps and our information with their friends and families. So after the first two, we chose Agua Caliente to continue this project. It's a really well-loved park within the Tucson community. And we wanted to be able to educate people about the animals at the park, especially the birds. And we also wanted to advertise things like the rotating art exhibits in the park's ranch house, as well as picnic sites, some other areas that people can reserve. So I'll kind of walk you through the story map a little bit. It's still very much in the development process, so it's far from done. But I think there's a good amount that I can show you today. So started with a web scene to kind of establish the geographical context of the park, and actually used the National Hydrography data set in this web scene to augment the flow lines of streams and washes around the park. and also used a 3D scene to kind of accentuate this area's topography when talking about how the spring was fed. And also I really like this kind of flying effect. I think it's fun. And then later on switch from this more modeled view to the actual ortho imagery of the park to kind of make that connection to what is actually in the real world from the map model. The next little content block we have is a timeline of the park. So this establishes the historical context of the park, all the way from indigenous folks living in this area to the present time. And we also thought of this as a repository for some of the historical photos of the buildings that are in the park so that people can see how they've changed over time. Have a map tour and kind of envisioned this as a virtual tour. So it starts where people would enter the park at the gate, passes by the area that burned in last year's fire, as well as the site of the future desert garden, and then goes on to the water features, one of the big draws of the park, the spring itself, the main pond, and the island that are in that park. Along with the second and third ponds and the hiking trails that are around them. And from there, the tour goes on to the buildings in the park. So within the context of the story, looking at the buildings allows a connection between the historical photos that we saw in the timeline to what is actually being done in the park now, current uses of the buildings. But then from a park management perspective, it gives us a place to talk about accessibility, ADA compliance of the different areas in the park, links, amenities, prices for some of the areas that could be reserved, these picnic areas. And it also gives us a chance to talk about areas that are off limits to the public, like the maintenance shop or restoration areas where we don't want people to go. One of the main goals of NRPR was to highlight the wildlife at the park, especially the birds. And so we have an area here where we can kind of educate people, not only with like a bird checklist, what people can expect to see and when, but also some more educational or public service things, like don't release your pets in the park. As well as not feeding the wildlife. And then the last part, something that I really enjoyed was looking at the fire that occurred at the end of September of last year. So included a swipe content block here, where on the left-hand side, it's the aerial imagery collected in March of last year. And then on the right-hand side, 1 week after the fire, we flew more drone imagery, and this allows people to really see the impact of the fire on this area in the park. In talking about the fire, I also wanted to talk about the restoration efforts. And so I took this same post-fire imagery and then overlaid it with landscape architects' plans for what the park or what this area of the park will be. So you can see the different plants, walking paths. There's a new reservable area here, so folks can kind of keep track of what's going on in the park, and compare that to what they're seeing in real life, along with a plant key down here. And this is all subject to change as the project continues, but these are documents that already existed, ways to teach folks what's going on at the park. And so I wanted to incorporate those into the story map here. So the next steps here in this project, NRPR staff are going to add photos and continue the story. the kind of collaborative process for this project started with an initial discussion about what NRPR's priorities were for the story map. I developed the theme, kind of the general outline of the story, and added the more GIS-y elements. And NRPR is now going to fill out their parts, telling the story and inserting photos from their archive. To facilitate this, we have a shared update group in ArcGIS online. So any member of the group can edit the story map in preparation for actually publishing it to the public. One thing that's missing from the story map right now is a map of the trails in the park. And we're working with NRPR's trails team to collect some GPS data and other trail attributes and add those in. Even though the trails aren't very extensive at the park, still want to show folks, what's going on there. And then kind of next steps after that is once we're done with Agua Caliente, we're going to move on to Tucson Mountain Park and do a similar thing. So thanks, Jenna, Elizabeth, for asking me to give a presentation today. Happy to answer any questions that folks have, or if you think of something after we're done here, feel free to contact me.
Oh, thank you, David. That was excellent.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions for David? All right, David, that means you were very thorough and perfect. That's
great. Love
nice
it.
job.
Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for being willing to do it on such short notice. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, happy to help.
I'm sure NRPR is looking forward to serving that out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, great job.